October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which is a campaign aimed at raising public awareness about the prevalence and devastating impact of domestic violence. With this in mind, we thought there would be no better guest for today's episode than Maisha Colter, CEO of AVDA, which stands for Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse. Maisha has spent 16 years in various positions at AVDA and now leads the organization as their CEO. She holds bachelor's degrees in social work and public policy, a master's in social work, and a law degree, which all are used to inform her life's work for victims of domestic abuse. Today, we're also very excited to welcome a guest host, Crime Stoppers of Houston Deputy Director Nichole Christoph. Nichole has been with Crime Stoppers since 2012 and supervises and coordinates the Crime Stoppers of Houston reward program, ensuring each tipster's anonymity remains intact and oversees the day-to-day operations of the entire organization. Nichole is a proud advocate for victims, and we're so grateful to have her as our guest host for this episode. This is the Balanced Voice Podcast.
Hi, I'm Nichole. I'm very honored to be here today, filling in for Rania and Jen, especially with you because AVDA and domestic violence is a very big touch point to my heart. I think everybody knows someone that's been a victim or they themselves have been a victim. And so it's just one of those crime types that it comes with a lot of baggage. So tell us a little bit about AVDA and what you do there.
Sure. So my name is Maisha Colter. I'm the CEO of AVDA, and I have been with this organization a total of 16 years. I have served in many roles: staff attorney, managing attorney, and currently the CEO. And what AVDA is a nonprofit that serves survivors of domestic abuse by providing them with free legal representation in family court. Excellent. We prepare them for the opportunity to get a protective order, divorce, custody, child support. Sometimes when there has been a fatality as a result of domestic abuse, we do adoptions.
Okay.
We also have the state's largest BIP program, and BIP stands for Battering, Intervention, Prevention Program.
Wow.
And it is an opportunity for people who have been harm doers in the relationship to get psychoeducation through a group format.
Okay.
So they're with a licensed clinician. So it could be a psychologist, social worker, LPC, 2 hours per week at our program. And they're there for a minimum of 18 weeks.
Wow.
We also have a pretty robust prevention program. It's a small group of people, but they are in schools, the HISD, Fort Bend ISD, but they also do private and charter schools as well. And they provide evidence-based curriculums to students in regard to healthy relationships, accountability, and things like that. And we also provide the same sort of education to adult populations, whether that be first responders or anyone who, in the community who's interested in learning more about domestic abuse and how it impacts all of us in some way, shape, or form. So they do a lot of that. Within the organization's portfolio, we have trauma counselors who work with survivors with their children and help them through their trauma and give them some emotional support, intelligence, so that they can move forward in a healthy way.
Right. You hit on several things that I'm just immediately, my brain is firing off all these questions, but I really love the aspect of working with the abuser to try to fix that.
Sure.
Because regardless of whether he or she ends back up with the partner that they abused, unless they themselves get some sort of help, they're likely to repeat the same behavior.
Yeah, that behavior is mirrored in all of their intimate relationships, whether and the whole point is the intervention is an opportunity for them to be retooled and to think about these choices that they make within that relationship. And not a lot of domestic violence resources are pointed in the direction of the harm doer, which I think is an unfortunate way of looking at the problem, because, as you say, they will be in relationships, whether it be that person that got them involved in BIP or some other. And if that is how they choose to function, in their relationships that will remain, and the problem will continue.
It just keeps rolling. And it's a shame, because I don't think anyone goes into a relationship thinking, I really want to be an abusive partner.
Of course not. Right.
And generally speaking, from what we see in Crime Stoppers and personal experience, is abuse is a learned behavior sometimes. And you come out of a situation thinking, I'm never going to be that person. Unless you work through it, you're very likely to become that person. Absolutely. So kudos on that. That's just amazing work. Tell me about your pillars. You guys have 3 particular pillars?
Sure. So what we're trying to do is empower survivors and hold abusers accountable, and educate as many people as we can about domestic violence and how it impacts everyone.
And that's so key. The education part is humongous. You think back 10, 15 years ago, and even further back, it's a domestic situation.
Right. Private.
And nobody talks about it. And,
quiet.
Law enforcement wouldn't get involved sometimes because they're more likely to be killed or injured in the line of duty when responding to a domestic violence case. And that's so scary. What can individuals do to empower a victim that's currently in a situation? Like, if I know somebody, what can I do?
So the one thing that you can do is believe someone, especially if they have the capacity to tell you or disclose that they are experiencing domestic abuse. As I said before, domestic violence used to be, and to some degree is still, a secret for many people.
Right.
It festers when there's sort of shame and secrecy around it. But believing the survivor, and then being educated about the resources that are available. That's the other thing. A lot of people don't realize what resources there are. A lot of times people will think shelter, like go to a shelter. And certainly that is a resource, and it can be needed and necessary. But there are a lot of people who their housing situation is not the determinant of why they remain in the relationship. And so sometimes it might be economics. Sometimes it might be wanting to have another parent for their children. It could be religion. It could be so many other factors. And so when you do encounter someone who's experiencing domestic violence, being able to just listen to them and be knowledgeable about resources that are there and directing them to those, then that will be helpful. And staying with them. One of the things that I think is critical is that we don't let the abuser win by that isolation. And keeping people away from their resources. And so if you have been a resource or an ally for someone, stick with them. Don't be frustrated if they return to the relationship. And just know that that's a part of the pattern. But that if they know that they can call on you and come back and say, okay, now this time I'm really serious, that's critical to have that support.
And you know, they get isolated by so many different factors. The abuser isolates them. Oftentimes family members isolate themselves because they don't know what to say or do.
That's a big one.
And having somebody that's always going to be like, I may not be happy that you went back to him. If anything changes, I'm still here.
Exactly.
That's gigantic.
Exactly.
And I love the aspect also that you guys offer the legal services, because how many people don't, like, I can't divorce this person.
Exactly. I don't have the resources. I can't pay an attorney. I'm going to
lose my kids.
My house. Yes.
They have me convinced that I can't survive without them. The kids are going to get taken away. All of these things that the abuser does, you know, that just further drives this into a bigger hole for the victim and for the abuser. So that's really tough. One of the things you talked about, keeping the perpetrator accountable, and it's hard because, you know, there's all these legal ramifications. You have to be able to prove a case. You have to have a witness that's willing to testify. And if the victim's afraid to testify,
makes it harder.
One of the things that I see a lot, because we have solved between 2007 and year to date, 2023, over 1,000 domestic violence related cases. That's everything from just domestic violence, assault, impeding breathing, violation of protective orders, murders. We've had murders, animal cruelty cases that were combined. Last month we had actually a case, the abuser killed a dog. A week later, he assaulted the victim's friend who was trying to help her, and she was pregnant, and also impeded the breathing of the victim herself. So 3 biggies that are always a big thing. But what we also see in our area is sometimes they're filed as misdemeanors and sometimes they're filed as felonies. And I find myself just shocked because so many domestic violence cases end in some form of a fatality. And I just don't, myself, I'm not a legal professional, so I'm like, how in the world can it be filed as a misdemeanor?
So one of the things that happens is an assessment, usually by your district attorney's office, and they're trying to determine whether or not they'll be able to prove the case. And so when you're filing and reporting, that police officer, whoever's answered that call, will have to present some evidence. What's the probable cause? What are the factors? And of course, with each level of the penal code, there's a description about what is that crime. And then not only defining the crime, but being able to practically go into court with sufficient evidence to meet those prongs of that crime. And so sometimes, yes, things get reduced down to a misdemeanor by virtue of the facts and the evidence to support the charge. Not necessarily that this is what all happened. This is all that we can demonstrate.
That we can,
if we go in front of a jury or a judge and put a presentation of evidence on. And unfortunately, things get minimized. The other thing is when you are responding to domestic violence situation, the trauma in and of itself impacts a person's capacity to report and retell information. Strangulation is a huge issue, and it's actually one of the elements that increases the likelihood of a fatality. But it impacts the brain. So when people are being strangled, they are actually being brain damaged. And that impacts lots of things, including memory, ability to tell a story, recall information, and that will unfortunately sometimes impact the probable cause factors and the factors associated with the crime elements that the person who's going to be on the end of that charge, which is the prosecutor. And so it does make it difficult. It's very frustrating, especially for advocates and people like us who are vying for some type of response from the criminal justice system. And of course, the highest level is the best level because the harder the consequences, the more likely we won't get to a fatality, especially when it's before a fatality, so yeah, it's just an unfortunate aspect of this particular crime.
It is. We were looking at some stats that we pulled from the Harris County District Clerk's site. And I know you guys have stats too. But right now for 2023, we are on pace to outnumber the Harris County cases. Last year, in 2022, there was an average of 1,600 domestic violence related cases. This year, we're averaging 2,100. What are you guys seeing?
Same thing. The crime and the fact that we're seeing more people come in the door for services means that it is increasing and not decreasing. And the good thing about it is that more people are coming into the door because they know about the resources. But the bad thing is that it's just happening too frequently. Did you guys see a big shift, obviously, during the pandemic because the isolation was compounded? We were very concerned about the nature of COVID and how we had to respond from just a practical standpoint. Being isolated, staying at home, not going to school, not going to work. Those are places where people can get accountability, can get to someone who's going to help them. And so when that went away, then obviously the possibility of more activity was higher. You had the economic factors. People were losing jobs and things like that. All of those stressors are the types of things that exacerbate and make it a more practical, a more typical response from an abuser when those things are happening. So yes, the numbers went up unfortunately.
Wow.
And then we saw lifetime protective orders. We actually had more lifetime protective orders in 1 year in 2020 than we had in like 2 years combined in terms of the number of them. And how you get a lifetime protective order is usually because there's a person who's had more than one protective order issued against them. The other thing is the physical assault.
Okay.
So if the person suffered an injury, like, a broken nose or broken bones and things like that, then that can increase the likelihood of a lifetime protective order. And we had those types of things happen.
Wow.
So the more substantial physical assaults than we had seen prior to COVID. The other thing that we had to deal with is we were already on the heels of, Harvey and there being like a backlog.
Right.
And then we had COVID happen. And so it was just like
a perfect storm.
I mean, yeah, it really was in terms of just the number of people that were sort of like everywhere and anywhere trying to get help with everything, to include the civil side, but also prosecutions and trying to figure out what's the status on this case and whether or not it's going to go anywhere or when is there going to be a real consequence.
Right.
And so it was just tough. It was a very tough time.
What is the average? Because you said lifetime protective order. What is the average protective order?
Sure. Typically, it's 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. So 2 year period from the time that the person gets it granted. It will last for 2 years. We do have instances where we go for a longer period of time, maybe 5 years. That could mirror, there's an infant, and before that infant, turns into a 5-year-old or starts school, we want there to be some real protections between the exchange of the child and the parent who's the applicant on a protective order and the responding parent. And so there's a lot of parameters that go into those types of protective orders. And so, we might ask for very specific time frame, but typically it is going to be 2 years.
Yeah. Thank you to our sponsor, FlipLock, for making this episode possible. FlipLock is a door lock unlike any other lock that was created as a nationwide, straightforward solution to protect your people, whether that be in universities, dorms, daycares, hospitals, or even government buildings. It can be added to nearly any door to keep you and yours safe. We are proud to have such a strong and like-minded sponsor of the Balanced Voice podcast. Check out FlipLock at fliplock.com. That's FLIPLOK.com.
A lot of people think of domestic violence mainly in the physical abuse side of things, but really it's
much more.
So much more. Can you tell us a few
Sure.
examples of other types of domestic violence?
So domestic violence includes economic abuse. It includes emotional abuse, which is name calling or gaslighting, doing things that really does mess with the mental health of the other person. Certainly, there is domestic violence around someone's status. So immigration is a big, humongous one where people really manipulate the person's need for, sort of making sure that they're okay with that versus making an outcry. So if you tell someone you're going to get deported, this is going to happen to you. And to be clear, there are actually protections in place for people who are in that particular situation. In fact, federal government has laws under VAWA that protect immigrants if they are being abused, especially if they're being abused by a citizen. So we have the ability to get protective orders for like human trafficking. We have the ability to get protective orders for people who are undocumented, and that they may have a right to receive legal help in regard to their status because of that crime that's being perpetrated against them.
And
but
that's education.
Yeah, letting people know that actually is there. But if you don't know, if you come from a culture or a country where there are not interventions, the government is not on the side of people, then you will believe that if you tell, it's going to be you who's going to lose and suffer, not the perpetrator.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. We hear all the time that when when a victim leaves is often the most dangerous time.
Absolutely true.
And everything that we talk about is having a safety plan. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of a safety plan and what's involved in that?
Sure. So safety plans should be individualized for the particular person. What I like to say to clients about safety planning is we want to ensure that not only that you leave, but that you leave and remain safe throughout the leaving process. And leaving isn't just the day you leave that house.
Right.
It is months after. I will tell you this statistic, and it holds true for at least the last 2 years. Every single person that we classified as an intimate partner violence homicide in Texas had research done on the circumstances surrounding the status between them and their abuser. 57% of all who lost their lives year over year had left. They had been away from that abuser for a minimum of 3 months and up to 6 months, and they still were killed. So that's the thing that people need to be clear about. Right. Leaving, we're not just talking about that next day.
It doesn't end.
Right. Leaving and being away from that person for a sustained period of time is what we're talking about when we talk about the separation. And then safety planning is taking into account everything that we know about you and that person. Do they know where your relatives live? Do they know your best friend's address? Because those may not be safe places for you to go. And so we think about that and we make a plan so that we don't give them the ability to come back and make contact with you or your loved ones and harm you and them. That's the other thing that we need to think about. The collateral deaths. There were multiple people who lost their lives as a result of being near or involved with that other person when they were leaving those relationships.
There was just a case a few weeks ago.
Sure.
Where that was exactly the case.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that's another, I think a fear factor for a victim leaving because
they want to protect their family.
Threaten, I'll kill everybody.
Yes.
If you leave. Yep. So it's not just you, it's the kids, it's your mom, it's your dad, it's your best friend.
Absolutely.
And then when you see it
actually happen,
proven, then
it makes it more scary to make that decision. Yeah. But we're talking about, let's maybe put someone in a hotel temporarily. Right. Or change locks. Or we may give them some other resources so that not only are they, in an undisclosed location for a temporary period of time, they have their basic needs met. They make a plan to work remotely instead of working in person. Now that we have experienced that, we know we can do those things. But that is what we mean when we talk about safety planning. Yeah. What papers to have on hand, what papers to make copies of and leave somewhere else. I have, clients, I tell them, make a copy, leave one at work, give one to your best friend. These documents, or making copies and making documentation of things before you leave. Like, here's what I would want if I could have some really good things as a divorce attorney in my hand for evidence,
That's a good point.
And so I talk to them about, do you know, what the accounts are on the mortgage? Do you know where the title paperwork is before we ever leave? Right. So let's think about all this stuff from a strategic plan so that when you do leave, not only do you leave with resources, but you leave with the ability to stay gone. Exactly. And so knowing those things will help me when I get to court and I ask for temporary use of the property or that this person pay the mortgage so that you don't have to worry about that bill and you can just attend to the needs of the kiddos. But that's the kind of thing that we consider safety planning in our role as an advocate working with our clients.
And that's also you just said so many things that really makes the purpose and the need for advocates so important because while I think I might know a lot of things, having an advocate that knows, okay, when this really goes down, we're going to need all of these things. So I can go in with a good heart. Yes. Trying really hard. Right. But having a partner
like professional skills and knowledge and sort of real world experience that helps to bolster that person's situation and circumstances in a way that guarantees a little bit more safety and self-sufficiency ultimately.
Right.
And all of those things are factors that help to keep them from having to return.
There's been some commercials on TV that's talking about people with cancer and what happens to them at work. And so it's like promoting the employer to support that cancer patient.
Survivor.
But what you said reminded me, we need to do the same thing for abuse victims. That we need to be able to, as an employer, if I suspect or somebody comes to me and says, then I need to be ready and prepared and willing to do what I need to do to help them further that. Yeah. That's such a good point.
Yeah, telling an employer that you're experiencing domestic violence can be a real resource. One is sometimes if, let's say, your abuser is going to your place of employment, as the owner of a place, you can file the necessary reports to get a no trespass for your employee. Certainly, like I said, you can accommodate a change in location sometimes. Maybe you transfer to this store and work out of this place until you get, moving on your divorce or whatever it is. But yeah, there's a lot of pluses to having a little bit transparency in those particular areas.
As hard as it is to tell.
It's tough, yeah, but it's needed sometimes.
My money is that employer probably already suspects.
Oh, sure.
And I've heard of cases where a coworker kept a diary in her planner. So-and-so came to work with a black eye. She looked like she had bruises on her neck.
Exactly. Or they overheard a conversation between the person and their harm doer and were like, ooh, and
that concerns me.
Yeah.
Right. And that's another thing that an individual can do to further support as well. It's you hate that you think you have to do something like that, but that could be the determining factor of a charge being increased.
Exactly.
A successful prosecution.
Exactly.
So, that's what a good, just good conversation. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
It's a shame we have to have these, but thank God that we have groups like AVDA that provide so many resources that are so desperately needed.
Yeah. So we have a communication going on between us and the sheriff to implement BIP in the Harris County Jail. Yeah.
Ooh, that's gigantic.
It's huge.
That's gigantic.
Yes. Yeah, we don't know. Yeah, we don't have it's going to start on this day and this is the group that, and we don't definitely have.
But it's in progress. And that's the key. It's progress. We're making progress. We're not perfect yet, but we're making progress.
In the right direction.
That's what a great place to get the abuser where they're at, meet them where they are at, and give them the services that they need. Because it's real easy to lock people up and cost something.
Exactly.
It's
but they're not going to be locked up typically for the rest of their lives unless they've got some kind of capital murder, you know what I mean? They're coming out and they're going to be in another relationship and they're going to potentially be in the same position as they were previously, making those choices or not making those choices.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's amazing work. Amazing. Congratulations. Thank you. I know you guys had your gala a few weeks ago, so we had ours too, and I know what a stressful time that is. So we appreciate you coming in, and we are wrapping up the end of Domestic Violence Month, so thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next week on the Balanced Voice Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to today's Balanced Conversation. You can find real solutions and tangible resources in our show notes at thebalancedvoicepodcast.com. To join the conversation, follow us on Instagram at The Balanced Voice Podcast and on Twitter at @BalancedVoice_. Stay up to date on Runya's work by following her at The Runya Report, and we can't wait to see you next week for another Balanced Conversation.